Thank you guys for joining the live podcast broadcast. Or if you're watching this later on, thanks for listening to the recording. My name's Julie Tran, and I'm your local Rogue Yogi, a recovering yoga addict with an at-risk status for hip replacement at age 35. And I'm here with a really awesome teacher. I have to give you the background on how I met Tara. I had heard about Feldenkrais for at least half a year, and the name itself was a little off-putting, honestly. I was like, Feldenkrais sounds kind of weird, but people were talking about how really awesome it was. And once I ended up in Chiang Mai, Thailand, I saw that there was a local yoga studio that offered Feldenkrais. And so I decided that I gotta take this class. I gotta try it out. It might be amazing. So we'll see. And that's when I met Tara. Tara was an instructor, Tara Eden. And within that hour and a half, it must have felt like 2 amazing hours. I learned so much more about my body than I did in over 12 years of classical yoga practice. And I just had to know more about Feldenkrais. And I'm so excited to be here with Tara because I think people should know about the world of somatics and Feldenkrais and hear it in layman's terms. And Tara's a perfect person to just tell it like it is. So thank you, Tara, for taking the time to chat with me and chat with our peeps in the room.
Thanks for bringing us together. Give me a few minutes to come into myself. I'll start sounding weird and awkward, and then I'll settle into myself, and I'll be fine. But you have to forgive me for my bumpy start.
Oh, don't worry about it. So you guys, this is Tara's first time being on I guess you could call this a webinar or a video cast. So if you guys comment hello and send her some love so that she can get settled in. And
how do I see that, by the way?
What?
How do I see the room?
Oh, here I'll send you the copy to the link of where everyone is in. So that's where everyone is at.
Probably worse to see this. But...
We have, let's see, we have your dad and Kate Breton. I hope I'm saying that right. We have Danny from Edmonton.
Daddy's there.
Yeah. Wow. And then we have Martin from Whitehorse.
Oh my God. The Canadians are all representing. I can't believe it. That's so cool.
Yeah. So Martin said that he took his first Feldenkrais lessons with you. And then he started his Feldenkrais training. You planted the seed in him.
There's actually been quite a few students, probably even in the back of your mind a little bit, that have learned about it and now are getting on board. I think it's important because, like you said, Feldenkrais still has this, I don't even know if it's a stigma. People know it enough to have it a stigma, but there's definitely an immediate association with the word Feldenkrais, right? It's awkward to say, it sounds like you're talking about Christ. And it's not easy to describe. So it's super important that especially younger people are getting involved now. And my hope is that there's going to be not necessarily a rebranding per se, but a new evolution of understanding what it's about and why it's important. So there's been a number of students, 6 or 7 of my students, who learned about it from me and were like, oh, wow, this has such huge implications, not just in terms of what it can do for your body, but what it can do for your own personal development and for other, so many different career avenues. So anyway, Martin and others have started the program and it's wonderful. And it's hopefully going to make a really positive impact overall, you know?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to learning more about it because you recommended the audio recordings of some old classes that are on openatm.org. And by the way, ATM means awareness through movement, for those of you new to what this is about. And there's like a whole vault of recordings from teachers from years ago leading full on instruction. Like it's like around 50 to 60 minutes. And I just thought, I can't believe these audios are free, you know? But even so, I mean, even practicing with these audios, I felt like your instruction was the best. Like, I don't know, maybe because you were a previous yoga teacher or something, but just the way that you guided us through the classes, I felt like I didn't have to like look at a screen or try to figure out what you were trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
You might have just gotten lucky in that class too. It depends a lot on the lesson and the group, because you have to constantly be adapting for who's there, especially when English is someone's second language. I mean, it's hard enough when English is your first language to follow the instructions. Not because it's complicated instructions, but to focus your attention in this particular way. For most of us at first is challenging, particularly if you're not already invested in doing it. And then if English is your second language, then it's even potentially more complicated. So I'm glad that it was a positive experience for you.
So wait, you get students. It sounds like you're getting local Thai students then.
There's sometimes Thais. Most of the Thais that come to my classes, yeah, English is their second language, but they're totally fluent, bilingual. It's more just that Chiang Mai is a super international place, so there's people from all over the world that are coming to class.
Well, how long have you been teaching in Chiang Mai?
About 4 years now, and it's a super transient environment. There's students coming in and going all the time. So I started out teaching somatic yoga, which was safer for me, and it was a language I thought to best describe the work. And then I discovered that actually embedding Feldenkrais directly into yoga is a little bit complicated. One is because a lot of times committed yogis already have a pretty clear image of what their practice is about. And it can actually, ironically, be a difficult population to be adaptable. I was a yogi like that. And more importantly, if you are already in, let's say, a posture and there's some degree of intensity or self-regulation to maintain the posture, then adding a layer of sensitivity on top of that can be kind of ridiculous. The Feldenkrais method, the ATMs are this ongoing process of constantly refining your sensitivity and your body awareness. So when we look at asana, you can argue that it's a process of being embodied and people are focusing on their movements and their alignment, but it's as designated by your teacher and as established by some sort of global standard of alignment. So if you're already trying to maintain yourself in your alignment and then refining on top of that, the intention of the awareness to movement can get lost. So anyway, that's a long answer to say that I decided to shift entirely into teaching awareness to movement purely and let people figure out how and when they can apply it to their other activities or practices.
So, how long were you teaching classical yoga?
Altogether, maybe 7 or 8 years. I had been a super yogi, really. My yoga was definitely an attempt to find some sort of alleviation from the pressure of my life. I was living in New York. And as anyone who lives in New York can relate to everything you do is intense because you're constantly competing with your every body and yourself, especially in an industry like yoga. You have to constantly be finding a way to separate yourself. And anyway, I was extremely intense myself. I was living my life in an intense way, and I was approaching my yoga practice in a really intense way. And so I thought that yoga was an outlet for me to alleviate my tension and my intensity, but it wasn't, because I was actually meeting my intensity.
When you say intensity, are you talking about pushing yourself to your end of range of motion, like trying to get super hyper flexible, or maybe like you go really hard at your chaturanga? Like, what does that mean to you?
For me, I was always naturally flexible and strong. So I would push myself to improve my asana, but for me, my intensity was more emotional and mental. And I was, it's more about the intention that I was approaching. I have this running gag about how I would cling to my mat for salvation. If you're trying to seek balance, you don't approach balance by doing something the same way that you're already doing it. So it took me a long time to figure out that's what I was doing. I think I knew it energetically, but I couldn't extricate myself from my environment to get the insight that I needed to make changes. So that's when I left New York. And I was already on the path of finding balance via changing my consciousness. At the end of the day, if you want to change your behavior, you have to first change your mind.
What did you start doing to change your mind? Because it's one thing to recognize that something's got to change, and then it's another big thing to actually do something about it.
Yeah. I think it took 2 years for me to do something about it. It probably was at least 10 years that I knew I needed to make some kind of changes. I mean, my previous life was kind of just being a drunk. That was my primary focus. And then I used yoga as a way to climb my way out of that addiction. And then yoga became its own sort of addiction.
That's interesting that you say that, because as you're sharing that, I'm thinking about how I wasn't necessarily a drunk myself, but I would drink a lot and do the drugs and the partying. And then the yoga became the next thing that became that dogma. And even my husband brought it up. He's like, why are you treating yoga like it's the answer? You
Mm-hmm.
know? And I've had so many students roll into the studio, and you could see they had it too, that maybe it's a type A personality kind of thing, or just that whole competition within themselves, and just like it just shows up all on the mat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's pretty epidemic. There's a lot of amazing yoga teachers out there still. And there's probably a lot of great yoga out there somewhere too. At the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, it's about the intention of the teacher, and then it's completely up to the student, right? It doesn't matter what kind of class it is. Anyone makes a choice how they're going to approach it. But I think it's super common, especially in North America. It's a wonderful fitness program. But like any fitness program or anything you do, if you enter into it with intensity, it's going to manifest in an intense way. If you enter into it with ease, it's going to manifest in an easy way. It's kind of a truism.
So you said that it took you about 2 years to go through the process of extricating yourself from that kind of pattern or habit. Did you happen to stumble upon a Feldenkrais class, or what was it?
Yeah, actually. I mean, when I left New York, I was I was on an active pursuit. I went to Chiang Mai. I had been practicing Thai massage in New York, and I'd learned in Canada, and all of my teachers had studied with the same master in Chiang Mai. And so my intention was to go and find him, not to perfect my Thai massage technique, but essentially for some spiritual guidance. And so because I'd set up the conditions for my own transformation, it was something that happened pretty easily. And so while I was studying with my teacher, I also literally hauled myself away from the world and created a little learning lab. And I was digging through the archives of my own experiences because I had to have a background already in different kinds of movement. And I had found Feldenkrais a gazillion years before, and it wasn't the time for me to understand and appreciate it. So I refound it literally online, some YouTube video, and that's where it began. Because of the conditions of how I was living, I was able to super, maybe obsessively immerse myself in the work in a way that people in the real world probably don't have access to in terms of time and devotion. So from the very first moment that I laid down and I did a lesson, it blew my fucking mind. There was no question. You know, I've tried many different kinds of movement modalities, and this shit blew my fucking mind.
I feel like for some people who are looking for a good sweat, or they just want to go through, an hour of something where it distracts their mind, this can be, Feldenkrais can be pretty challenging because you don't have any music playing, you're asked questions, and you got to decide on your own what the answer to that question is. And it just, it makes you look inward. And some people feel like, oh, I don't know if that's for me, and some people are like, wow, this is eye opening, this is fucking awesome.
It's going to be something that's for everybody. The way I've been looking at it these days is that it establishes a new vocabulary. So first of all, you have to already be curious and open to learn. And then from there, the implication is that once you establish the new vocabulary, it's not that you replace that from your CrossFit or your Ashtanga or whatever it is that you're doing. It's that you have a new level of understanding that you can approach your practice. Or if you're a mom or you have an office job, whatever it is that you're doing, you can approach it with a new level of consciousness. At the end of the day, the method has the potential for you to improve in so many different ways, in terms of how you organize yourself physically, in terms of how you relate to the world or you deal with things mentally and emotionally. The choice is always up to yourself, and the degree of learning is also up to yourself. It's useful when you have a teacher that can create a container for your learning, but it's really up to the individual. So it's never going to be accessible to everybody. You have to be ready, and you have to be particularly open to the concept of learning, which unfortunately a lot of us want things to be different, but we're not actually willing to change anything. We want to do things differently, but we don't want to make any adjustments to how we live. So I think of it as a box in our minds. And some of us will cross from one end of the box to the other end of the box, but we're still staying in the box. What's interesting here with Feldenkrais is that you have the potential to exit the box. It's difficult to describe because it literally evokes a different way of perceiving. And that's something like meditation. You can talk about it till your face falls off, but until you are actually experiencing that, then you say, oh, I see what that's about. People like you can get a glimmering of it, even taking one class and being like, oh, the implications of this are huge. In 12 years, I didn't learn this thing, because you're curious, because you're open to learning. So the potential is there.
I mean, I kind of wish that all yoga students and teachers had a background in somatics first. Because, I mean, even to this day, so I write for an online magazine called Shut Up in Yoga, and there was an interview I did with Garrett Neal, and it was an awesome interview about, because yoga injuries are a serious thing. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but I mean, I certainly am now that I'm at risk for a hip replacement. But talking about how to reduce injury and how to empower the reader or the person learning about this to discover and instill upon themselves the knowledge, the choice, and the inner sense to know if something hurts, don't fucking do it anymore. There's a lot of backlash from, well, it's mainly teachers from a specific lineage I will not name, but they tend to get really pissed off because it goes against what they've been teaching, and they want to be able to tell the student exactly what to do, and it's just such a, I don't know how you call it, there's kind of a polarity going on. You take a yoga class, you're being told exactly what to do for the 60 to 90 minutes, and it takes something to think outside of that and say, hey, wait, why are you telling me to do this? Why am I doing it? Like, what can I do differently from what I've been told my whole life?
The guru phenomenon has a lot of risk, and there's so much of this blind sheep leading blind sheep. And there's still so many schools of yoga that, in my opinion, are housed by teachers that are so deeply insecure themselves that they need to constantly maintain their status along the hierarchy. So that, their students are constantly striving to be more like them. And when you have that kind of framework, then there's never a potential for someone to actually connect to themselves or to listen to themselves or to grow. If anything, they're going to be constantly drawn away from their own experience, and it becomes looking to someone else to figure out, well, what am I supposed to feel? What am I supposed to be doing? Is that good? Is that a good pain? Is that, and yeah, it's dangerous and it's idiotic and it's extremely common. And I think it's really safe for people. It takes such a huge leap of faith to trust yourself and to begin the process of listening. I know for myself, I was always a movement embodiment person anyway, and it took forever for me to come to a place to be like, okay, now I'm actually ready to start learning how to listen to myself. Just beginning the process of learning, and it's an ongoing process. I don't think it ever ends. But coming to that place that you can even consider listening is in itself a leap of faith. And it's extremely important. And like you said, it should be the basis for yoga. Before you enter into yoga, you should already have some sort of background in listening to yourself, in recognizing sensations. In terms of functional anatomy, that might come. It's also important. But generally, people go about it backwards. It's not until we injure ourselves that we realize, oh, I haven't been listening for the past year, 5 years, 30 years, whatever it is. And that's a shame. My feeling, my hope feeling is that there's a change happening. And this is why Feldenkrais has been around forever. And part of why it's gaining popularity is because I really think that there's a change. I think people are becoming more interested in listening and being autonomous, and that their practices are their own. I remember for myself, when I was first doing yoga, I was dependent on the sequence in order to do something. It wasn't my own practice. It wasn't my own experience, independent of how I was led in the class. And my hope slash feeling is that people are moving more away from that. I'll say as a little plug, here in Thailand, there's a woman named Emma Warmington with Viviani Yoga, and she is single-handedly restoring my faith in yoga, because she is approaching, it's still yoga, and still has the structure that I personally now balk at. However, she has such clarity in her intention about it being a practice of embodying your own breathing and experiencing yourself from your breathing, and it not being dogmatic. And she had heard about the work that I do and is already, I think, instinctively teaching somatics. And she asked me if I would come on and actually teach somatics. So now she's doing an advanced level teacher training here in Thailand in September. And what I personally think is incredible is she has me come in to teach awareness through movement. These are people that are already yoga teachers, maybe on a basic level, maybe they've been doing it for a long time. But they have an opportunity, which again, it's timing and opportunity and access, to learn awareness through movement. And then with them, I'll take it a step further, and I'm actually going to help them look for certain ways that they can start to extract elements of the practice and use it in their teaching, not by actually putting chunks of awareness through movement in their teaching, but finding kind of the gems they can use. Anyway, the point is that somatics is a total necessity for anybody that wants their physical practice to be something other than a blind soldier marching behind whoever their leader is, you know?
So how do you balance being a student and being a teacher? How do you nourish yourself in the midst of a busy schedule?
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, what's hilarious is busy schedule. I don't have a busy schedule. I have an incredibly privileged, blessed life that is definitely peppered with times of intensity and busyness, but I don't have a busy life. That's why I left New York, because I don't ever want to be a busy person. I don't want the value of my life to be a mark of how busy I am. But I still see the intention of your question, which isn't fair for me to answer, because, like I said, I have an incredible amount of time and space to cultivate my practice, an unrealistic amount for the average person in the world. So the question is more, well, how does the average person in the world bring this into their daily lives? And, the answer is it's really hard. And it has to be a priority. We prioritize things all the time. I remember myself, it makes me think of back in the day when I was a struggling yoga teacher and didn't have much of an income. And I would always giggle to myself, because if there was any disposable income, I couldn't spend it on a massage or some sort of self-care. I'd buy a bottle of wine. I mean, actually, that was self-care as well. But you know what I'm saying? We prioritize. We decide what we're going to spend our money on. We decide what we're going to spend our time on. We decide who we're going to spend our time with. So if it's important, then you make it happen. A lot of the awareness to movement lessons, especially on feldenkraisresources.com, Elizabeth Barringer has an incredible learning series. They're literally about 30 minutes long. I listen to them religiously and have been for years. You can make the time to bring it in if it's important to you. For me, as far as the balance of teacher-student, there's no different. I didn't stop being a student once I became a teacher. And in fact, I'm a much better student now. I'm a much more attentive student. Every time I teach, I'm learning. And I always feel kind of spoiled because the way that I can learn through teaching is very powerful and unique. And you have to be a teacher to be able to access that kind of learning.
Is it through observing how your students respond to your questions?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. That's hilarious. There's kind of a running gag with awareness through movement teachers about how did you get that out of what I just said? But for yoga teachers too, I'm sure it's the same thing where you'll be telling something and everyone in the room is doing something different. You're thinking, okay, there must be a different way of saying this. But no, I mean, that's part of it. Languaging in Feldenkrais is important, but much more significantly is learning about the body through observation. Learning for myself, having always been naturally strong and flexible, I actually have a bigger challenge than a lot of other teachers because I can do things, you know, I can listen to an instruction and immediately be like, oh, I get that, and do it for most instructions. And that doesn't allow for me to be a very observant teacher, right? So my work is constantly learning about the way that people struggle, the challenges that people have that aren't something that I can relate to or something very different than my own. I have plenty of challenges and struggle, don't get me wrong, but mine are quite different from my students. And so that's the biggest reward because I'm a body worker as well and have been for a million years. So I would say my body work practice has improved exponentially since the years that I've been teaching awareness through movement, mostly by beginning to understand more about people's chronic tension or holding patterns, postural habits, that kind of thing. You know?
So you mentioned earlier in the chat that someone who gets thoroughly trained in Feldenkrais and Somatics, that it can be an opportunity to pursue other professions. So I would say body work is one of them. What would be other avenues people can take?
Feldenkrais is an awareness practice, and it uses the body as a container to begin to develop your awareness, right? So if I do a series of very small movements with my arm, I'm improving my awareness of my arm. However, the way the brain works is I'm not going to discriminate my awareness to just being able to sense my arm. If I can sense my arm, it means I'm using myself in a different way. I'm slowing down, I'm changing my breathing, I'm observing and getting sensory feedback in a new way. I'm literally using my brain in a different way. In that way, I don't think there's a limit to how this method can have a positive implication in anything we do. We can always benefit from improving our awareness. I know for myself in my personal relationships, I have a heightened degree of awareness in how the nuances of how my behavior affects other people. I think that if you are in a field where you're coaching or working with clients, you'll have a heightened awareness of the nuances of your own behavior and the nuances of what they're saying to you, what they're displaying in their body. I think that you can improve your precision physically if you're anything from an athlete to a surgeon by refining your awareness of what it is that you're actually doing. When you understand what you're doing, you are going to be better at doing what you want to do. So I think of the practice, again, even though it's at its base, it's about improving mobility and about using your awareness to find improved ease in your body. The practice is ultimately is about personal development in a way that can affect your life in a blanketed way, have a blanketed effect on your life. You know what I mean?
What I'm getting so far is that it's essentially recognizing what pattern you've been living and I'm sure there's a whole shit ton of patterns that we have in our lives, and once we can recognize it, and then we can actually develop a different perspective, a different solution to approaching a situation. Um, it's, I mean, it's weird. I'm thinking about the Matrix now. It's almost like dissolving the Matrix. I mean, I hope it doesn't sound like crazy shit, but it's like seeing something that you hadn't paid attention to for years and suddenly noticing that it's there and then realizing, oh, wow, I've been doing it like that on autopilot. I
I
mean,
think,
I could, you're going to say?
no, go on, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that I did this awareness through movement lesson on, it was, I forgot the instructor's name. It was a really good lesson where we're lying on our backs. No, we're sitting, and our legs are kind of apart, and you have to like stick one hand behind you and then reach the other arm forward, and realizing at the end that your spine is, you know, it's this moving thing that's moving in a corkscrew kind of motion, and how that impacts how you walk. And I literally realized after 35 years that I had been walking like the stiff, with the stiffness. My arms weren't moving at all. They were just stuck by my side. And after doing that lesson, I was able to relax the arms and just let it move as I was taking a step. And that was mind blowing.
Mind blowing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's always something. There can be huge changes, there can be subtle changes. Like I said, I do awareness and movement lessons religiously. I do them daily. There's no end to the learn. The more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn. The more you know, the more you realize there is to know. So it can be a wonderful tool if you are looking for relief from pain, which most of us, that's, again, we approach this kind of practice because we have something fucked up and we want it fixed. And that's, we're like, I'll do anything. So there's a huge implication of pain management and healing. But way before there's ever pain, there's always a potential for improvement. And maybe if you start improving early on, then you don't get to the point, like with your hip replacement situation, then you don't ever get to that point that something starts falling apart because your whole system is more efficiently organized or what have you. Especially young people. I keep, Feldenkrais, another reason that I'm just now coming on the radar is because it used to just be something for old people, you know? And what's hilarious about that is because old people are people who have lived life long enough to understand that it's up to them, that they have to be autonomous, that they have to be actively involved in their own healing process, and they're ready to slow down and observe and refine. And then when we're young, and of course I'm speaking in broad strokes, right? When we're young, we either feel nothing, kind of fit in vinegar, and we don't want to slow down. We're still trying to push ourselves to the limits and see what our capacity is. And I feel like, God, if only I couldn't have taken this medicine 10 years ago, unfortunately. So I don't expect that suddenly people will, but my God, if they could, if we could start to refine our awareness as young people, we are going to be so much more highly evolved as we develop in our years.
True. I mean, would you say that that is a challenge that you're experiencing? Do you get younger students coming in, or is it still a lot of older folks?
It's a mixed bag because when people hear that something's called awareness through movement, there's a lot of curiosity about what that means. So I can't discriminate too much yet, other than to say that what is consistent is that people that are more mature in years almost always are more drawn toward the practice, or let's say immediately have more recognition of the implication of the practice. Definitely more common when I have people in my classes that are younger, that they're the ones that are super agitated or kind of like leave abruptly when class is over, like you run out of there. But the fact that there's young people that are coming and there's young people that are doing the training and again, getting the word out, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it'll be something more relevant and accessible for young people too.
I mean, if you're seeing younger folks doing the training and coming to the classes, then would you say in the next couple of years that maybe the ratio might shift
Absolutely.
a little?
Yeah, it's definitely happening already. What's so interesting and maybe most sacred to me is that, still here I am as for example, and doing this live thing with you and the video and everything is so, for me personally, is so far from my comfort zone. You can tell I'm calming down a little bit, but not really fully an hour later, right? So it's weird for me to speak like this because I'm not that old. And yet there's such a great divide between how younger generations are experiencing reality online, screen time, and how I feel I experience reality pre-internet, and how that's affected my value system, let's say. So what's super sacred to me about this practice is that I think it's never been more important than now, when there's becoming a greater and greater divide between people and their embodied sense. So my hope, especially with young people, is this realization that as we become more and more connected globally, digitally, we become more disconnected in an embodied way, and that there's going to be some recognition of that. And this is one way that people can start to reestablish a connection with themselves, and they can share that with other people. Probably the most difficult thing is going to be expressing why it's important. You grew up with your social circle being on a screen and spending most of your life in some sort of seated position. You already, as a starting point, are disengaged, disembodied. So I don't know. I wish maybe you guys that are out there in cyberspace have some sort of idea about how embodiment can be attractive to people that don't even have a baseline comprehension of what embodiment is. So maybe it's a totally naive belief, but my hope is that the implication of this kind of practice is going to gain in popularity as an antidote to how people are otherwise continuing to live,
Yeah, having this podcast itself it's kind of a paradox, right? Because people are probably sitting watching this, and it is part of that whole system of technology that people could be bombarded with. But personally coming from a generation where I grew up before having a computer, and then seeing the internet explode, and then seeing how the next generation that's all they know is social media technology. It's a pretty interesting place to be, because then I can see from both aspects, okay, well, there's got to be a way to bridge the gap between the two worlds. And, fortunately or unfortunately, it's using this medium so that people can somehow stumble upon this or discover this conversation and say, yeah, maybe I should unplug a little bit more and be more inward, you know.
We know so much more about our laptops than we do about our own bodies. We know so much more about our cars. We hear there's something wrong with our vehicle. We can diagnose, so there's this thing going on, and it's so ironic because we drive in this guy every day of our lives, and we don't know very much about it. We don't know when it's not well, and when it speaks to us, a lot of the time we ignore it. You know, like, oh, oh, you feel tired, get out of bed, or oh, that hurts, walk it off, or you know what I mean? It's so interesting. Yeah.
Deep Thoughts by Tara Eden. In terms of the intensive that you're teaching the awareness through movement, like where specifically, where in Thailand is it?
It's in Chiang Mai. I can't talk about the details too much online, but I teach a somatic movement immersion, and I use awareness through movement lessons to illustrate. However, the intention of the program, it's called Learning to Listen, and the intention of the program is to find various ways of fine-tuning your own sensitivity. So by sensory experiences, referencing gravity, referencing space, like an awareness through movement lesson, but also via observation, via discussion, via touch. And again, the program, most of all, is about personal development. It's mostly for people that have hit some sort of wall and are ready to find other ways around it than just smashing into it over and over again. So I host those 2 times a year. There's 2 modules, 2 5-day modules. The next one is coming up June 18th. There's still a few spots left, actually. The first module is 5 days in town, and then the second module is also a retreat. We go to an off-grid floating retreat center called Om Waters, and the nature of being offline and secluded from any sounds or distractions allows for people to go really deep in a really profound way. So if you're curious about that at all, I encourage you to come check it out or talk to me about more information.